The fluorescent lights of courtroom 4B in the Cook County Courthouse flickered slightly as Michael Patterson adjusted his ill-fitting suit jacket. Outside, a typical Chicago November rain hammered against the tall windows, the grey sky matching the knot of anxiety in his stomach. He'd borrowed this suit from his neighbor, and it showed. The sleeves were too short, the shoulders too broad, but it was all he had for what might be the most important day of his life. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Thornton," the bailiff announced. Michael stood quickly, his calloused hands gripping the edge of the defendant's table. 10 years working construction sites had left their mark on his weathered face and rough palms, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Across the aisle, his ex-wife Jennifer sat with her attorney, a sharp-dressed man in what was clearly a $1,000 suit. Jennifer looked polished, confident, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Michael made in a week. Judge Thornton entered, a woman in her late 50s, with steel-grey hair pulled back in a severe bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She carried an air of someone who had seen it all and wasn't impressed by much. "Please be seated," she said, settling into her chair with practiced efficiency. Case number 2023 CH 47891, Peterson versus Patterson, custody modification hearing. Jennifer's attorney, Harold Brennan, stood immediately. "Your Honor, my client seeks full custody of the minor child, Emma Patterson, age 12. Miss Peterson has remarried and can provide a stable two-parent household with significant financial resources. Mr. Patterson, meanwhile, continues to struggle financially, works irregular hours, and lives in a modest two-bedroom apartment in a questionable neighborhood." Michael's jaw tightened. Questionable neighborhood. His apartment in Pilsen wasn't fancy, but it was clean, safe, and filled with love. Emma had her own room, painted lavender because it was her favorite color. He'd painted it himself, staying up until 3 a.m. to finish before she came home from the hospital. "Your Honor, if I may," Michael's court-appointed attorney, a young woman named Sarah Chen, who looked fresh out of law school, stood tentatively. "Mr. Patterson has been Emma's primary caregiver since the accident 18 months ago. He's attended every medical appointment, every physical therapy session." "The accident that occurred on his watch," Brennan interrupted smoothly. "A preventable tragedy that left Emma Patterson paralyzed from the waist down." But the words hung in the air like an accusation. Michael felt his face flush, the familiar wave of guilt washing over him. The memory was always there, playing in an endless loop. Emma running to catch the soccer ball, him turning his back for just a moment to grab his phone, the screech of tires, her scream. Judge Thornton peered over her glasses at Michael. "Mr. Patterson, I've reviewed the accident report. You were at a park, distracted by a work call, while your daughter was struck by a vehicle that jumped the curb. Is that correct?" Michael's throat felt tight. "Yes, Your Honor, but—" "And in the 18 months since," the judge continued, flipping through papers, "you've been fired from 2 jobs, had your electricity shut off twice for non-payment, and according to these financial statements, you're 3 months behind on rent. Is that also correct?" "Your Honor, I've been prioritizing Emma's medical bills," Michael said, his voice shaking slightly. "Insurance doesn't cover everything. The wheelchair modifications alone cost—" Judge Thornton held up her hand. "Mr. Patterson, I appreciate that you love your daughter, but love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't ensure stability." She looked at him with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. "You're a construction worker who can barely keep a roof over your head. Your ex-wife is married to a cardiologist. They live in Winnetka in a 4-bedroom house with a fully accessible first floor, a pool with a wheelchair lift, and the means to provide Emma with the best care money can buy. But she doesn't want that." The words burst out of Michael before he could stop them. "Mr. Patterson," Judge Thornton's voice was sharp, "I'll remind you that outbursts are not tolerated in my courtroom." Sarah Chen touched Michael's arm, a warning to stay quiet. Brennan stood again. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Patterson's living situation is unsuitable." The apartment building has no elevator, forcing Emma to be carried up 3 flights of stairs daily. The bathroom isn't properly accessible. And frankly, Mr. Patterson's emotional state since the accident has been questionable. He's isolated Emma from her mother, filling the child's head with, "That's not true!" Michael stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Jennifer left us 6 months after the accident. She couldn't handle it. I'm the one who learned how to do Emma's catheter care, who wakes up every 2 hours to turn her so she doesn't get pressure sores, who carries her up those stairs because I can't afford to move yet. Mr. Patterson, sit down." Judge Thornton's gavel came down hard. "One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." Michael sank back into his chair, his hands trembling. Across the aisle, Jennifer dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the part of the concerned mother perfectly. "Your Honor," Brennan continued smoothly, "Miss Peterson deeply regrets the difficulties following the accident. She was dealing with her own trauma and admits she made mistakes. But she sought therapy, rebuilt her life, and now wants to provide Emma with the opportunities and care she deserves. We're not saying Mr. Patterson is a bad person, just that he's not equipped to handle this situation." Judge Thornton nodded slowly, making notes. "Ms. Chen, does your client have anything substantive to add? Any evidence of financial stability or improved living conditions?" Sarah Chen stood, her voice uncertain. "Your Honor, Mr. Patterson has recently secured steady employment with Dalton Construction. He's enrolled in a program for affordable, accessible housing and should have a new apartment by spring. And most importantly, Emma has explicitly stated she wants to remain with her father." "Children often don't know what's best for them," Judge Thornton said dismissively. "That's why we have courts and parents to make these decisions." Michael felt his world crumbling. The judge had already made up her mind. He could see it in her face, hear it in her tone. To her, he was just another struggling single father who couldn't provide the material comforts his daughter deserved. She didn't see the late-night talks, the laughter during their movie nights, the way Emma's face lit up when he came home. She didn't see love, she saw poverty. "Your Honor," Sarah Chen said, a note of desperation in her voice, "Emma Patterson is present in the courtroom. She's 12 years old, and Illinois law allows the court to consider the wishes of a child of that age. She has a statement she'd like to make." Brennan scoffed. "Your Honor, this is clearly a ploy." "I'll allow it," Judge Thornton said, though her tone suggested she was simply going through the motions. "Bailiff, please assist the witness." Michael turned to see Emma in her wheelchair near the back of the courtroom, her long brown hair pulled into a ponytail, wearing the blue dress they'd picked out together at Target. His heart swelled with pride and broke simultaneously. She looked so small, so fragile, yet her eyes held a determination that reminded him exactly why he was fighting. The bailiff moved to help her, but Emma shook her head. "I can do it myself," she said clearly, her voice stronger than Michael expected. The courtroom watched as Emma wheeled herself forward, navigating the aisle with practiced ease. She'd been working with her occupational therapist on upper body strength, and it showed. When she reached the witness stand, she looked up at the elevated box with its steps, an obvious barrier. "Your Honor," Emma said, her voice calm but firm, "I'd like to testify from here if that's okay. I don't think the courthouse has a ramp for the witness stand." For the first time, Judge Thornton's expression shifted slightly, perhaps a flicker of embarrassment that her own courtroom wasn't fully accessible. "That's acceptable," the judge said. Emma positioned her wheelchair to face the judge, her hands folded in her lap. In that moment, Michael saw not his little girl, but the strong young woman she was becoming, despite everything. The bailiff approached with a Bible for the oath, and Emma placed her hand on it. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Emma said, and Michael noticed Judge Thornton lean forward slightly, her earlier dismissiveness replaced with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or the first hint of genuine attention. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere had shifted. Emma Patterson was about to have her say, and for the first time that day, Michael felt a spark of hope. Emma looked around the courtroom, her gaze steady despite the intimidating setting. The oak paneling, the American flag standing sentinel in the corner, the court reporter's fingers poised over her stenography machine. It all should have been overwhelming. But Emma had faced far more frightening things than a courtroom in the past 18 months. Sarah Chen approached gently. "Emma, can you state your name for the record?" "Emma Catherine Patterson. I'm 12 years old, and I'm in 7th grade at Shields Middle School." "Thank you, Emma. Can you tell the court about your daily routine?" Emma nodded, her voice clear and composed. "I wake up around 6:30. Dad helps me with my morning routine, getting dressed, bathroom stuff, transferring to my wheelchair. He makes breakfast, usually scrambled eggs or oatmeal because they're cheap but healthy. Then he carries me down the 3 flights of stairs from our apartment." Judge Thornton's pen moved across her notepad, but her expression remained neutral. "What happens then?" Sarah asked. "Mrs. Rodriguez from 2B drives me to school on her way to work. She's really nice. She even put a foldable ramp in her van so I can get in and out easier. Dad picks me up after school at 3:15, unless he has to work late. Then Coach Martinez from the school stays with me until Dad gets there. He's never been more than an hour late, and he always calls. And after school, we do homework together at the kitchen table. Dad didn't finish high school, but he's really good at helping me figure things out. He says learning together is better than knowing everything." Emma's voice softened. "Then I have physical therapy 3 times a week. Dad drives me to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. It takes 40 minutes with traffic, and gas is expensive, but he never misses it." Michael watched his daughter, his throat tight with emotion. She was telling their story, the story Judge Thornton needed to hear. "Emma," Sarah continued, "can you describe your relationship with your father?" For the first time, Emma's composure cracked slightly. Her eyes found Michael's across the courtroom. "My dad is my hero. I know that sounds like something a kid would say, but it's true. After the accident, when I woke up in the hospital and they told me I couldn't walk anymore, I wanted to die." The courtroom went completely silent. "I remember lying in that hospital bed thinking my life was over. I was 10 years old, and I thought I'd never do anything normal again. Mom would come visit, but she'd cry the whole time or stand in the corner looking uncomfortable. She couldn't look at my legs. But Dad—" Emma's voice grew stronger. "Dad learned everything. He asked the nurses a million questions. He practiced transfers with the physical therapist until his back hurt. He researched wheelchairs and accessibility and adaptive sports." Brennan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Michael saw Jennifer wipe her eyes again. But this time, the tears looked genuine. "The day I came home from the hospital," Emma continued, "our apartment wasn't accessible at all, but Dad had already started making changes. He'd sold his truck, his really nice truck that he loved, to buy my wheelchair and modify the bathroom. He installed grab bars and a shower seat. He rearranged our whole apartment so I could reach everything." Judge Thornton looked up from her notes, her expression unreadable. Sarah asked, "What about the stairs, Emma? The court has heard that your father carries you up 3 flights every day." "He does," Emma said simply, "and yeah, it's not ideal. But Dad's been saving every extra penny for an accessible apartment. He showed me the listings. There's one in back of the yards that might open up in March. It's on the ground floor with roll-in shower and everything." She paused. "But more than that, those stairs taught me something important." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "That being dependent on someone isn't weakness when that someone never makes you feel weak." Emma's voice was firm now. "Dad carries me up those stairs, but he never acts like it's a burden. He jokes with me. He asks about my day. He makes me feel like just because I can't walk doesn't mean I can't stand tall." Michael saw Judge Thornton's expression shift, the hard edges softening almost imperceptibly. Brennan stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I'd like to cross-examine the witness." "Proceed," Judge Thornton said, though her tone had lost some of its earlier impatience. Brennan approached Emma with a practiced smile. "Emma, you love your father very much. That's clear. But isn't it true that your mother can provide you with things your father cannot? A house with no stairs, a pool where you could do aquatic therapy, your own bathroom that's fully accessible. Yes, Emma said without hesitation. Mom and Stephen have a really nice house. And wouldn't you like those things? Wouldn't life be easier? Emma tilted her head, considering. Easier? Maybe. Better? No. Why not? Brennan pressed, a hint of frustration creeping in. Because the best house in the world doesn't matter if you don't feel wanted there. Emma's words were quiet, but devastating. Mom left 6 months after my accident. She said she needed space to process her trauma, but I was the one who got hit by a car. I was the one who lost the ability to walk, and Dad stayed. Jennifer let out a small sob, and Stephen put his arm around her shoulders. Emma, Brennan tried again, your mother regrets that. She's explained she wasn't in the right headspace. I know, Emma interrupted, and I've forgiven her. I love my mom. But love and trust are different things. I trust my dad. When I wake up scared in the middle of the night because I had a nightmare about the accident, Dad's there. When I'm frustrated because my body won't do what I want it to do, Dad reminds me that I'm more than my legs. When I feel like a burden, Dad proves I'm not. Judge Thornton leaned forward. Emma, I'd like to ask you something directly. If your father's apartment building had an elevator, if he had better financial stability, would you still want to live with him? Yes, Your Honor, Emma said immediately. Why? Your mother and stepfather can give you advantages, better medical care, educational opportunities, a peer group in an affluent neighborhood. Emma looked directly at the judge, and in that moment, she seemed far older than 12. Because my dad sees me. Not my wheelchair, not my limitations, not a problem to be solved. He sees Emma, the girl who loves drawing and wants to be an architect someday, the girl who makes terrible jokes and laughs too loud, the girl who's learning to play wheelchair basketball and might try out for the team next year. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Mom wants to help the disabled girl. She wants to fix what's broken. But Dad knows I'm not broken. I'm different now, yeah, but different isn't less than. Dad taught me that. He lives it every single day. The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her eyes fixed on Emma. My dad messes up sometimes, Emma continued. He burns dinner. He forgets to sign permission slips. He can't afford the fancy stuff. But he's never made me doubt for 1 second that I'm the most important thing in his world. Can you put a price on that, Your Honor? Because I can't. Sarah Chen stepped forward. No further questions, Your Honor? Brennan stood, looking uncertain. Your Honor, the child is clearly articulate and has obviously been coached. I object to that characterization, Sarah said sharply. Sustained, Judge Thornton said, her eyes still on Emma. Mr. Brennan, I've been on the bench for 23 years. I know the difference between a coached statement and genuine testimony. Continue your cross-examination or sit down. Brennan hesitated, then sat down. No further questions. Judge Thornton removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. Emma, I have one more question. What would you say to your mother if you could tell her anything right now? Emma turned to look at Jennifer, who was openly crying now. I'd say I love you, Mom, I really do. And I'd like to see you more, but I need to live with Dad. He's my home. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Emma. You may return to your seat. As Emma wheeled herself back toward her spot in the gallery, the courtroom remained silent, except for the soft sound of her wheels on the floor and the rain still pattering against the windows. Michael watched her, his vision blurred with tears, and saw in his daughter's face a strength and clarity that took his breath away. Judge Thornton shuffled her papers, her expression thoughtful. When Emma was seated, the judge looked up at both legal teams. We'll take a 15-minute recess, she announced. When we return, I'll hear closing arguments, and then I'll make my ruling. The gavel came down, and the courtroom exhaled collectively. Michael turned to Sarah Chen, searching her face for any indication of what might happen next. That was... Sarah started, then stopped. shaking her head in wonder. "That was the most powerful testimony I've heard in my brief career. If Judge Thornton doesn't see your family for what it is after that, then—" She left the sentence unfinished. Michael looked back at Emma, who gave him a small, brave smile. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. His daughter was the strongest person he'd ever known, and he'd fight for her with everything he had until his last breath. Outside, the rain began to lighten, and a thin strip of pale November sun broke through the clouds, casting a silver light across the courtroom floor. The 15-minute recess stretched into 30, then 40. Michael paced in the courthouse hallway, his borrowed suit jacket now draped over his arm, his shirt sleeves rolled up. Emma sat in her wheelchair nearby, Sarah Chen beside her, going over some notes, but mostly just providing silent support. Jennifer and Stephen stood at the opposite end of the hall with Brennan, their conversation hushed but animated. Twice, Michael saw Jennifer glance in Emma's direction, her expression conflicted. "Dad?" Emma's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Yeah, sweetie? Whatever happens, it's going to be okay. You know that, right?" Michael crouched down beside her wheelchair, taking her hand. How had he raised a child who comforted him instead of the other way around? "You were incredible in there. I'm so proud of you." "I just told the truth," Emma said with a small shrug. "That's all we've ever had, the truth." The bailiff appeared at the courtroom door. "Judge is ready." Michael's stomach clenched. This was it. Sarah Chen squeezed his shoulder as they walked back in, and he tried to read her expression for any hint of optimism. She gave him an encouraging nod, but her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. The courtroom reassembled with the same formality as before, but the atmosphere felt different, charged with anticipation. Judge Thornton entered, and Michael noticed she carried an additional folder she hadn't had before. "Please be seated," she said, settling into her chair. Her expression was unreadable, her judicial mask firmly in place. "Before we proceed to closing arguments, I want to address something." Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. "In my years on the bench," Judge Thornton began, "I've overseen hundreds of custody cases. I've seen parents fight over children like their property to be divided. I've seen good people make terrible decisions, and I've seen terrible people put on convincing performances. I've become perhaps overly cynical about these proceedings." She looked directly at Michael. "Mr. Patterson, when you walked into my courtroom this morning, I'll admit I had already formed an opinion. A single father, construction worker, financial difficulties, and a disabled child acquired on his watch. The math seemed simple." Michael felt his face flush, but he held her gaze. "I was wrong to prejudge," the judge continued, her voice softer. "And your daughter just taught me a lesson I should have learned long ago. This court, this entire system, is supposed to be about the best interests of the child. Not the best house, not the best bank account, the best interests of the child." She opened the folder before her. "During the recess, I reviewed something I should have read more carefully from the beginning. Emma's school records, her medical files, her therapist's reports. Every single person who works with Emma Patterson describes the same thing. A resilient, happy, well-adjusted child with a strong support system centered around her father." Jennifer inhaled sharply across the aisle. Her principal notes that Emma never misses school unless she has a medical appointment, and Mr. Patterson always provides proper documentation. Her physical therapist states that Emma's progress has been exceptional, largely due to consistent home exercises that Mr. Patterson facilitates. Her counselor, mandated after the trauma of the accident, reports that Emma demonstrates healthy emotional processing and attributes much of her recovery to feeling secure and loved at home. Judge Thornton looked up. "Mr. Brennan, your client has resources, significant resources, and I don't discount the value of financial stability. But Ms. Peterson also has an 18-month gap in her daughter's life, a gap that occurred during Emma's most critical period of adjustment and recovery." Brennan started to stand, but the judge held up her hand. I've read Miss Peterson's therapist's letter explaining her need for space during that time. I don't doubt her trauma was real. But Emma's trauma was also real, and more immediate. She was 10 years old, newly disabled, terrified, and her mother left. Not physically abandoned, but emotionally unavailable when Emma needed her most. Jennifer was crying quietly now, and Stephen's face had gone pale. "Your Honor," Brennan tried again, "my client deeply regrets—" "I'm sure she does," Judge Thornton said, not unkindly, "and I believe those regrets are genuine. But this court must weigh those regrets against 18 months of consistent, devoted care from Mr. Patterson. This court must consider that Emma, at 12 years old, has a voice that deserves to be heard. And that voice has spoken clearly about where she feels safe, supported, and loved." Michael's hands were shaking. Sarah Chen grabbed one of them under the table, squeezing tight. "Mr. Patterson," the judge addressed him directly, "you are not without fault in this situation. The accident occurred under your supervision. Your financial situation is precarious. Your living conditions are not ideal." Michael's hope faltered. "However," Judge Thornton continued, "you have demonstrated remarkable dedication to your daughter's care. You've made sacrifices, financial, personal, professional, to prioritize her well-being. You've created a home environment where Emma thrives despite significant challenges. And most importantly, you've helped your daughter maintain her dignity and sense of self-worth during an extraordinarily difficult transition." The judge closed the folder. "In custody matters, Illinois law requires this court to consider several factors. The wishes of the child's adjustment to home and school, the mental and physical health of all parties, and the willingness of each parent to facilitate a close relationship with the other parent." She paused, looking at both parties. "Ms. Peterson, I'm not questioning your love for your daughter, but I am questioning whether you've demonstrated the emotional consistency and stability Emma needs at this critical time in her life. Your return to her life is recent. Your remarriage, while providing financial advantages, also introduces another significant change into Emma's world." Jennifer nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Patterson," Judge Thornton said, "you need to address your financial situation. I'm concerned about the housing instability, the job changes, the mounting medical debt. However, I'm also aware that many of these challenges stem directly from prioritizing Emma's medical care over your own financial security." Michael nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Therefore," Judge Thornton said, her voice taking on an official tone, "it is the judgment of this court that primary physical custody of Emma Catherine Patterson shall remain with her father, Michael Patterson." Michael's knees nearly buckled. Sarah Chen grabbed his arm, steadying him. Across the aisle, Jennifer let out a sob, and Brennan's face remained professionally neutral despite the clear defeat. "However," the judge continued, "this is not a total denial of Ms. Peterson's petition. This court is ordering the following modifications to the existing custody arrangement." She began reading from a document. "Ms. Peterson shall have supervised visitation every other weekend and 1 weeknight per week for the next 6 months. After 6 months, if these visits demonstrate consistency and positive emotional outcomes for Emma, unsupervised weekend visits will be permitted." Jennifer looked up, a glimmer of hope in her tear-stained face. "Additionally," Judge Thornton continued, "Ms. Peterson and Mr. Stephen Morrison shall establish a medical expense trust fund to cover Emma's ongoing therapy, equipment needs, and future medical costs not covered by insurance. This will alleviate Mr. Patterson's financial burden and ensure Emma receives optimal care." Michael blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected this. "Mr. Patterson, you are ordered to participate in financial counseling services provided by the county, and you must notify this court within 60 days of securing accessible housing. The court will revisit custody arrangements in 1 year to assess the family's progress." Judge Thornton looked at Emma, who was sitting quietly in the gallery, tears running down her face but a smile on her lips. "Young lady," the judge said, her stern demeanor finally cracking into something warmer, "you are a remarkable individual. Your testimony today reminded me why I became a judge in the first place, to ensure that children's voices are heard, not just their parents' arguments." Emma wiped her eyes and nodded. "This court is adjourned." The gavel came down one final time. For a moment nobody moved. Then Emma was wheeling herself forward as fast as she could, and Michael was running to meet her. He dropped to his knees in front of her wheelchair, and she threw her arms around his neck, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. "We did it, Dad," Emma whispered. "We did it." "No, sweetie," Michael said, pulling back to look at her face. "You did it. You were so brave." Sarah Chen approached, a genuine smile on her face. "Congratulations, Mr. Patterson. That was, well, I've never seen anything quite like that." Michael stood, shaking her hand. "Thank you for everything." Across the courtroom, Jennifer approached slowly, Stephen hanging back by the door. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the proceedings and her daughter's words. "Emma," Jennifer said quietly, stopping a few feet away, "I'm so sorry for everything. You were right about all of it." Emma looked at her mother, and Michael saw his daughter's compassion shine through. "I know you are, Mom. And I meant what I said. I love you. I want you in my life, just on different terms than before." Jennifer nodded, more tears falling. "Can I hug you?" Emma opened her arms, and Jennifer knelt down, embracing her daughter carefully. Michael watched, his own emotions complicated. He didn't hate Jennifer. He never had. She'd made mistakes, but she was Emma's mother, and Emma loved her. When they separated, Jennifer looked at Michael. "Thank you for taking care of her, for being what I couldn't be." Michael nodded. "She's our daughter. We both love her. We just need to figure out how to do this better for her." Jennifer smiled weakly. "The trust fund, it's not charity. It's the least I can do. Stephen and I discussed it during the recess. We want to help." "I appreciate that," Michael said, and he meant it. Pride had nearly cost him everything today. He could accept help when it was offered with good intentions. As they left the courthouse, the rain had stopped completely. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting Chicago in golden light. The streets were wet and glistening, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Emma wheeled beside Michael as they headed toward the parking garage where he'd left his borrowed car. "Dad? Yeah? Can we get pizza to celebrate? The good kind from Giordano's?" Michael laughed, checking his wallet mentally. He had enough, barely. "Deep dish? Is there any other kind?" Emma grinned. They drove through the city, the radio playing softly, neither of them needing to fill the silence with words. At a red light, Michael glanced over at Emma. She was looking out the window, watching the city pass by, and he saw in her profile the child she'd been and the woman she was becoming. "You know what the best part of today was?" Michael asked. "What?" "Watching you stand up for yourself. And I mean that, literally and figuratively." Emma groaned at the pun, but she was smiling. "Dad jokes. Even after winning custody, you still make dad jokes." "It's in the job description," he said, "along with embarrassing you in front of your friends and insisting on taking way too many pictures at important events." "Did you take pictures today?" Michael pulled out his phone at the next red light, showing her the screen. He'd taken a picture of her wheeling herself up to the witness stand, her face determined and strong. "That's my favorite picture of you ever," he said quietly. "Because that's the moment I realized you don't need me to fight your battles anymore. You can fight them yourself." "I'll always need you, Dad," Emma said softly, "just differently than before. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we're both learning how to be different versions of ourselves." They pulled into Giordano's parking lot, and Michael helped Emma with her wheelchair, the routine so practiced now it took only seconds. As they headed inside, Emma suddenly stopped. "Dad, one more thing." "What's that?" "Thank you for never giving up on me, on us, even when it was really, really hard." Michael felt his eyes sting again. "Emma, giving up on you has never even been an option, not for 1 second. You're stuck with me, kiddo, stairs and all." Emma laughed. "At least until March, when we get that new apartment." "At least until then," Michael agreed. They went inside, ordered the biggest deep dish pizza on the menu, and sat by the window watching the sun set over Chicago. The city stretched out before them, massive, complicated, sometimes cruel, but also full of possibility. Michael Patterson didn't know what tomorrow would bring. There would still be bills to pay, stairs to climb, challenges to overcome. But for the first time in 18 months, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. And sitting across from him, sauce on her chin and laughter in her eyes, Emma felt it too. Not just hope, but certainty. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she needed, learning exactly the lessons that would shape her into the person she was meant to become. The accident had taken her legs, but it hadn't taken her spirit. And with her father beside her, she knew she could face whatever came next, one day, one challenge, one small victory at a time. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered in the gathering dusk, and somewhere in courtroom 4B, Judge Margaret Thornton filed away a case she knew she'd remember for the rest of her career. Not because of the legal complexities or the dramatic testimony, but because a 12-year-old girl in a wheelchair had reminded her what justice was really supposed to look like. It looked like love. It looked like sacrifice. It looked like a single father and his daughter, sharing a pizza and planning for a future they'd build together, one day at a time. And that, the judge thought as she locked her office and headed home to her own family, was something no courtroom ruling could ever fully capture: the immeasurable value of being truly seen, truly known, and truly loved, exactly as you are.